All right, we're here with special guest today, Lance Giambelluca. Lance is a managing director at Merrill Lynch here in Austin, 33 years at the company, and certified financial planner. Lance, you've had two jobs. You've been at Merrill Lynch, and before that, you were at the Four Seasons. And we're going to talk today about that. Four Seasons, known for outstanding customer service. Tell us, what's one of the craziest things you've ever seen when it comes to customer service and just going the extra mile that you learned at the Four Seasons? Welcome.
Well, I was fortunate to work at the Four Seasons here in Austin during college and started in the health club. And back in the early 90s, we've had some very prominent guests that would come that would require us to literally open up the fire exit so they can run up and down stairs at 4 o'clock in the morning, which was fun. Also had, everybody from, you name it, U2 to the Queen of England. And I think when the Queen came, that was one of the more enjoyable times because she pretty much shut down the entire hotel so that she could have herself with her whole entourage. But it was a great job and definitely learned a lot from it while I was in college.
How does that work? Like, if the Queen calls, aren't there already other guests that are booked? You can't tell those people to kick rocks, or do you? How does that work?
You pretty much tell them to kick rocks, yeah. With the Four Seasons being a Canadian company and the connection with England, that was pretty much the only hotel she could stay. And pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that was probably the summer of 91 or 92. But yeah, she pretty much took over the whole hotel while she was there.
Well, we want to get into today how this sets you up for a career in financial planning and the lessons learned. But I think when people hear the Four Seasons, they think over-the-top experiences and they think great customer service. What does that mean to you working? How long did you work there? 3 years?
3 years, yeah. So something you just said, which the
Okay.
Four Seasons will never say, is customer service. Everyone is a guest and you treat them as guests. The term customer is something that always sends red flags for me, especially in the financial world. All of my clients are clients, not customers. Customers are simply people that basically use you for a task. Clients are people that appreciate you for what you do and take your advice. And you always want to treat people, especially guests in a hotel, better. You always want to know their names. You want to know what they like. You want to know what they're used to doing. But it's always about, and this term keeps coming up even in my life now, is how do you exceed expectations? So that was the one thing that was drilled upon us when we were at the Four Seasons is every single client, customer, guest, you name it. We like to refer to them as guests then, is what can we do to make their time with us truly memorable? And if you think about the loyalty and the fact that once someone comes, whether it's the Four Seasons or the Ritz-Carlton or you name, some of the nicer hotel chains, is the reason they come back is because they feel special and they feel like they're not just a number. My wife and I have had chances to spend many different occasions in Four Seasons, and we're always amazed at the data that they have on us as far as the things we like and the things we don't. And, most of us understand in the world of having Salesforce and having note taking, how easy that is for them to do it. But it's a totally different story for them to deliver on that and know in advance who's coming and the briefs that you get in the morning and what names you need to use for the different guest names. It's just truly a wonderful experience. And it taught me a level of expectation that I didn't, at the age of 19 to 21, it was truly just a wonderful opportunity for me to learn.
So when you say the information they have, give us a practical example of what information and how that would play out.
So years ago, Jen and I were in Georgetown in DC, and we stayed at the Four Seasons. And I'm not sure exactly what happened. I think maybe they gave us an upgrade room, but there was a platter of fruit in the room for us. And I made a notation when I left that I really appreciated the plums. And it's extremely rare that I check into a Four Seasons where I don't have fresh fruit waiting for me. Now, that means that they know something and that they appreciate me and that it makes me feel a little bit more special. The one thing, my last name is not the easiest to say. For some of us, it's even harder to spell. But when I check into a Four Seasons, not only do they know who I am, but they know how to say my last name. That makes me feel special.
I think that's the secret. I really do. I'm lucky enough to have stayed in Four Seasons as my primary hotel over the last number of years. And the service that's provided to you is more of, and I always use the term like, it's more of a return to serve service. We've all had the overbearing waitress or the waiter, people that are using your name and there's really not a sincerity to it. I think the Four Seasons does an amazing job of just kind of watching you and then reacting to what you need. It could be as simple as breaking out the umbrella before the first raindrop hits as the car is pulling up, to making sure that, the car seats are secure in the back of the minivan for the family of four, and just being proactive on a reaction basis versus, overpowering. They make it comfortable. And Izzy, who was the founder of it, he had a quote that I saw, which is, luxury is not what you give somebody. Luxury is how you make somebody feel. And if you
Mr.
really
Sharp was
think
very
that
good.
through, that's pretty darn deep. Yeah, it's really deep. It's not, chandeliers and marble floors. Yes, those are important, and beauty and artwork, which he was famous for, getting great artists in all his hotels, and mostly local artists, as a matter of fact. So probably in the Four Seasons in Austin, there's local art. I only know a lot of this because a friend of mine, one of my investors in one of the companies I had years ago, was personal friends with him, and this investor's wife was an artist, and she had a lot of artwork in the Canadian Four Seasons up in Toronto. Anyway, it's a non-overbearing experience.
It's what's nice about the Four Seasons. It makes everyone feel comfortable, and it doesn't really matter whether you're, obviously, 80 years old or 30 years old. They go out of their way to make sure that you're comfortable. And I think, yeah, Mr. Sharp was definitely ahead of his time when it comes to making sure people want to come back and experience that same experience.
Well, it's not just guests. That's the way he insisted his employees be treated.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not, he led the way in many ways with the, really caring about the people who worked in his hotels. He had great benefits for people. He didn't stand for yelling and screaming when someone made a mistake. And that was going to be a couple of my questions. Do you remember the hiring process?
Yeah. So for me, it was interesting. Yeah. For me, I was at the University of Texas for college, and one of my fraternity brothers actually worked in the health club, and he was graduating, and he mentioned to his manager that he thought I'd be a good replacement. And I think the main reason was because I kind of had a little bit of OCD and I liked everything neat and clean. And he knew that was extremely important within the health club. So I remember meeting with his supervisor and the supervisor, and it was all about just, what is it that makes you tick? What is it that you like? And the questions weren't necessarily difficult, but they just really wanted to see if you were someone that they could trust that was actually going to do a good job. And so I started in the health club, and had an opportunity to actually, believe it or not, do a couple papers while I was in business school about how we could make the health club a little bit more efficient. And one of them was, how do we make sure that the massage therapists were not only getting more business, but how could we, as the healthcare, the health club technicians, how could we possibly make additional income? And I actually presented it to our general manager, and it was instituted, and it was something that actually worked pretty well. And it gave me a little bit of a feel for what it's like to not only incorporate what you're learning in college, but to do it in real time. And from the health club, I was there for about a year, and then there was an opening within the concierge department. And whether it was going to be a bellman or the occasional doorman, I thought that would be a better way for me to kind of spend some time. And without question, the concierge is top notch. And I still use the concierge at the Four Seasons for planning purposes. But by the time I had been there for 2 years, I was promoted to the weekend doorman. And I can honestly say, having that role on the weekends at the Four Seasons Some of the sights and sounds and people you would meet were pretty impressive, especially for a 20, 21-year-old. Got to drive a lot of fun cars, got to meet a lot of nice people. And I can honestly say the income that I made my last year of college was a lot more than I made when I started my full-time job at Merrill. It was a good gig to have.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to realize, and it maybe came later in life, I don't know, but were you conscious of that you were being taught something bigger than just opening doors? Did it resonate with you?
It, it,
Or
it,
is this something that, you just kind of experienced and then later on it kind of sunk in?
it resonated really quickly for me, and it just felt right. I mean, it felt like this is how I'd like to be treated. The things that we were doing, the meetings that we were having to make sure that every guest had a pleasant experience. One of the things I had spoken about earlier was that, whenever someone famous would come, they always would have, they probably wouldn't want to check in under their name. And, whether it was Oprah Winfrey being Bobby Joe Jenkins or Don King being Mr. Washington, you name it, they always had fun names. And it was up to us to refer to them as their new name. And of course, sometimes you would say their new name. And I remember Mr. King basically saying, I don't know who that is. I'm Mr. King. And, to me, that was kind of what we were supposed to do. But at the same time, we understood the assignment. But I think it really resonated with me pretty quickly, especially when I got to the concierge, because they have to be on nonstop. I mean, there is no mistakes that they can make. They have to do everything there is to do, and it was really the things that I learned there, no question, have shaped who I am. And more importantly, I think from a career standpoint, to have that same level of consciousness, the sense of what can I do today to make my client's situation better? How can I treat them? What can I do differently? And that resonates with my team. And, there's something about, how do you wow a client? And I know, financial services you can do it. You can do it by yourself. You can do it with low cost people. You can do it with full service people. But why wouldn't you do it if you're getting treated well and you're also getting everything else along with it, especially if it's the same cost? So that's kind of how I work
Did,
now. And I think it's definitely benefited me personally, my team, as well as my clients.
let's have a little fun with this. I know the Four Seasons gives every employee a budget or kind of an amount that they can use to fix a problem or serve a guest. Give us some examples. Did you ever have to do that? Did you ever have to spend some company money to fix a problem and not have to ask permission to do so?
So when I was at the Four Seasons, that wasn't an actual opportunity. I know the Ritz-Carlton does that now. And yes, they typically have a budget of $2,000. So if there's a decision that they can make that's not going to cost over $2,000, they have in their, they can do it. They can make it right on the spot. I'm sure the Four Seasons has something similar now. But when I was there, it was, the guest is always right. Anything you can do to help the guests make it right, do it. And if as long as you use that as your North Star, that was really how you managed. But the one thing that was interesting was one of the benefits of working at the Four Seasons back in the day, and I'm sure it's still the case, was, you always got fed a meal or two while you worked. And there was a chef on staff. And needless to say, the food was always good. But whenever you went to the cafeteria for the employees, there was just a big bulletin board of all the client, the guest comments about who went above and beyond. And that was kind of the nice thing to see is every single day you would see new comments come in about who in our organization went above and beyond. And that was exciting. And it kind of had that, it just made people want to do that much more. And the one thing that I will say is if there ever was a situation where you did something that you weren't supposed to do. Perfect example, we could never ask for autographs. We could never ask for photos. That was completely taboo. And that was grounds for dismissal. If you went, and it was really hard for me not to go up to Joe DiMaggio and say, hello, Joe, nice to meet you. He was sitting, 10 feet away from me and I got a nod from him, but everything in my body wanted to go up and just shake his hand just because of all the stories that my dad had told me about Joe DiMaggio. But that was taboo. You didn't do that. That was not making the guest experience what it should be for someone that just wanted to be there and not be bothered.
I'm
Lance,
curious. Hang on, Randy. I'm just curious about one thing so we can close this part out. What was the escalation path? Like if you saw something, let's say someone bumped into Joe coming up the stairs, an employee bumped into him, or someone dropped his suitcase, or he just seemed to be in a not the great mood. Who did you escalate? Would you go to the head concierge and say, hey, I saw this happen, and what was their escalation process?
Well, I would, yeah, with the, it was pretty much always going to be your direct manager. Being, the concierge obviously kind of knew that they were the front. They were the first people that everyone saw, even more so probably than reception, just because everybody had questions for the concierge. For me, for sure, there were two individual employees that I work with that were just top notch. One of them was a young lady named Jennifer Anthony. She was just really just ahead of her time, and it taught me a lot about what a strong woman could do as a manager. Because you got to remember, I'm 19, 20 years old, and she was as professional as anyone, and just always had that air about her. And there was another gentleman by the name of Tommy Dean that was also a concierge. And Tommy just retired recently, and I would give anything to have him come speak to my employees here, just to share what his 40 years of being a concierge of the Four Seasons meant and the things that he was able to do. But there weren't many times, Anthony, that I can ever think of people ever abusing that. But I guarantee you, if they did do something they weren't supposed to, discipline was pretty quick, and people understood that just wasn't acceptable.
Lance, I want to get into specifics. We've been kind of, talking service, and I want to know practical things like what would you do for a customer? So you talked about the board where people went above and beyond. Give us some examples of what got put on that board of actual tangible things.
Well, for me, one thing that I did was we had a guest, not a customer, and I'm gonna keep saying that, Randy, because you keep referring to them customers, but they're guests. And we had a guest that would come to visit us. He was an attorney, and he had a massive sheepdog named Farmer. And this sheepdog had to be 100 pounds. And I would always, just because I missed my dog back home, I would ask the guests, would it be okay if I took your dog for a walk after I got off today? And for him, it was like the nicest thing that anyone could ask for. But for me, it was like, why wouldn't I do that? I mean, to me, it was it was enjoyable. But he always would ask for me when he'd come back. And if I was available and I was there, I would do it. There was another celebrity that was very, very popular in the 90s. Who, he was so popular that every Friday I had to move his room because a lot of the young groupies would kind of find out what room he was staying in and try to knock on the door and that. But every single Friday, I would literally go to his room, take all of his belongings and move him to a different room, let him know. And I got to know him pretty well. And I wish I would have kept that relationship going because he's still a pretty popular guy out there.
Give us other examples, things you saw other people do maybe. What are things? Because I think there's a lot of benefit here. If people hear these and it'll give them ideas that they can implement in their own lives or their own business.
It's interesting.
Or how are you using your lessons? How are you using your lessons in your current career?
Well, it's all about listening. I don't know if either of y'all have watched the show The Bear. It's based in Chicago. It's about a restaurant. And there was one episode that just so resonated with me because one of the younger cousins goes and understands what it is to run a 5-star restaurant, about what it is to actually just continually just to make its situation better. And in this situation, they're in Chicago they're at this wonderful restaurant. And one of the comments was, the only thing I didn't get a chance to do was get a Chicago deep dish pizza. And so the waiter heard this, told the back office. The back office ran out, got a beautiful pizza from the local pizzeria, brought it back, did their magic to it, made it their own, brought it to the guests. And it was like, that was so reminiscent of what would happen at a Four Seasons is you always have to be listening. You always have to be asking the questions. And that's kind of what it is now is, I'm blessed that I get to work with clients and they get to tell me what it is that their dreams are all about. But one thing that I always like to ask and is, what keeps you up at night? What is it that you're worried about? Because if I know what you're worried about, I can definitely do the best that I can to take care of those worries. But it's not about the investments as much as people think. It's about the relationship. And they want to know that they can call someone and that they can basically know that we're listening. That's the key. Every single week we get together and say, what did we hear about this week? What are clients doing? Are they traveling? Are they spending time with grandkids? That's really what I like to do and move the needle because it's all about them. That's what they have to realize is that we're here to serve them. I was trained years ago after I left the Four Seasons on the servant mentality. I'd love the opportunity to work with you. It's all about serving someone and working with someone. It's never the taskmaster. It's about always being there for the long term.
Yeah, that is so powerful, Lance. Like the deep dish pizza story. I'm thinking we had a conference in Vegas years ago, and our team, we went to this nice steakhouse, and the kid that was there, like pouring water, asked what drinks we wanted, and one of the guys ordered a Dr. Pepper, Diet Dr. Pepper, or something that they didn't have on the menu, and we didn't think much of it. Pretty soon, 20, 30 minutes passes, and this kid comes back, and he's got 3 of them, and my friend's like, well, I thought you didn't have it. He's like, I went to the gas station, and literally this kid left the steakhouse, went to a gas station, bought him, we'll call it Dr. Pepper, bought him 3 Dr. Peppers. And I remember being blown away. I was the one paying the bill. And I ended up tipping that kid, I think, almost as much as I tipped the waiter, for going to do that. So, that was, for me, that was really noticeable and going above and beyond. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I will, y'all all know this. When you have good service, you tell 10 people. When you have bad service, you tell 100 people. And it's all about that dynamic. And I know personally, and this is if I ever feel like I'm just a customer or just a number, I just don't do business with that group. This is probably going to get me a little bit in trouble, but I love cars. I was a huge BMW fan. I felt like the dealership was basically they didn't care who I was. And I kind of just said, you know what? I'll never buy another BMW again. I love them. I like when I see them, but I won't go to the dealership here because it was simply a bad experience. And that's been going on 15 years now.
We're making all this sound easy. It isn't easy to be pleasant all the time under every circumstance and under the pressures of running a business. The Four Seasons, I don't know, are they public, Lance? I can't remember if they're public
they're
or
publicly
private.
traded.
I think they're still private. They're public.
They were
so they're under pressure.
publicly traded.
They're under pressure to perform on a quarterly basis in earnings per share. Your team is under pressure to grow your portfolio. So it's not easy to balance, all of those, quote unquote values with the pressures to grow. But we know from experience that if you can stay the course in creating a pleasant environment for your employees and for your guests and for your clients, that the long-term growth and the stability of the organization will be there. But it isn't easy to maintain that every single day under the pressures of growth. Not everyone can do it. So my question to you is, in your experience, and I know you can't talk about individuals, but what percent of people that you've hired over the years have made it in your business today, applying your values? Because you've carried your values from Four Seasons to your business. Is it 80%, 50%? I mean, I'm talking long term.
Yeah. So I've been blessed or sometimes cursed to be in management in my lifetime. And it's a really good question because there have been a lot of people that we have hired, not necessarily working on my team, but I'm very adamant whenever I'm doing interviews, I'm always trying to get a feel for whether or not this person is going to be that quote, Four Seasons type person, or whether or not they're more salesy, or if it's about them. And, overall, the success rate in the financial services business is not, probably 25, 30% last 5 years. And I think a lot of that goes down to the point of what you said, is that it takes time to develop the relationships. And if you don't have that, the hardest person in this world is the guy who thinks he's the Gordon Gekko of the world. That's not what financial planning is, at least not in my world. In my world, it's all about the relationships, and the financial planning is just part of that relationship. And I really try to, determine that, does someone have that in them? Are they a servant mentality? My team, I have 7 employees on my team. We're all very different personalities, but we all understand one thing, is that, the interest of the client always comes first. And that's from Charlie Merrill from 115 years ago. And, it just resonates, which is the same thing that with the Four Seasons had. It's always about the client. It's always about the guest. It's never about you. And I have seen a lot of people fail in this world. And whether it's, financial or just whatever business, is that whenever you start pointing fingers and letting people know that it's them and not you, you pretty much know that that's pretty much not going to work. So I think,
Yeah.
going back to your question, it's more about, I don't, I think the lessons that I learned at the Four Seasons, no matter what career path I would have chosen, I think I still would have obviously used them, because it became who I was and who I am. I'm just really, really happy that it happened when it happened. Maybe if I did that at 30 or 35, it would be completely different. But during my formidable years, to get that when I was really trying to figure out who I wanted to be, the timing couldn't have been better.
Yeah, it took me, and I look back on my career, and I see Izzy's, one of his mantras was, hire for attitude. He can train anybody. You can train people to develop skills. And man, when I look back on my hires over 40 odd years, I didn't catch this until very late in my career. I always hired for the resume, the skill, and I did not do a good job of determining, does this person have the attitude that is going to fit with the current circumstances that we're under? Are they going to be there to fight the battle, or are they going to be, as you said, pointing fingers and so forth? And part of that was growing up in corporate, big corporations with lots of political infighting and things like that. So I'll blame them for my immaturity. But boy, later on in life, when I started asking questions in interviews more about, how do you feel? What kind of things have you accomplished? What things have you overcome in your personal life? Things like that tell you more about a person than whether they can code or if they're a good salesman, and so on and so forth. So hats off to you for getting it early in your career, because man, it's certainly paid off in a lot of ways, not just in business, but in terms of the kind of person you are in general. So
Well, thank you.
even
Well,
though
I
you
will tell
couldn't get
you
into
that.
Texas A&M, I get
No, I
that,
did.
but you had to settle
I,
for
I did.
Texas.
I did get into Texas A&M. I did get a full scholarship. I just couldn't find my way to College Station. There was no car that I could borrow or rent. But one thing. It's funny you say that, Anthony. I do, whenever I interview someone, I always ask, what's the biggest failure that they've had? And I'm amazed how many people that are interviewing for jobs just have no failures. And it scares me. But I also think
Yeah.
it's about the team, and I learned that, this concept of trying to be a jack of all trades, there's no way that you can do that in an enterprise like the Four Seasons. You have to work with others. And that is something that's extremely important, even, in my current role, is I know what my limitations are. I know what I'm good at. I know what I struggle with. And it's my job is to surround myself with people that make me look better by doing all the things that they're better that I don't either do or want to do. And that was, how the departments worked in the Four Seasons. And that's how I think the most productive teams work in the financial industry is, trying to do it all. I don't know how anybody does it. And quite honestly, if they do it, they can't do it that well.
Yeah.
When you talk about interviewing and trying to find people with this attitude, do you have tips or tricks or hints for people? Is it questions you ask? Is it something you look for that you feel? Tell us more about that.
I'm probably borderline ask questions that I'm sure my corporate entity would not like me to ask, but I really want to know what makes them tick. As much as you're not supposed to ask about family, I want to know how important their family is. I want to know what they do for their hobbies. I really want to just get to know them. I always ask them a situation that they had to overcome. I love the failure question. And if if and when they answer that question about failure, if it's not their fault or they had nothing to do with it, I'm pretty much guaranteed that that person is not going to be part of this institution, because obviously they were part of something. But the one thing, and I had a chance recently to teach a single class at UT, and it was a wealth management class, and I gave them a little bit of advice. I'm pretty sure I've interviewed at least 500 people over my time span, is 33 years. I've had two actually say, I would like this job. Two, they don't ask for the job. I don't know how they interview for something without asking. They think just being there is asking. But I will tell you, to me, that's kind of like a non-starter. Is if you're there, say, I want this job, because that's what's going to resonate. And I don't know why they don't teach them that in college, but I sure hope these 40 UT students that I told that to do that, because I do think it'll make a difference, especially if they're interviewing with someone like me, who's a little bit more old school. Not as old as Anthony, but old school.
Yeah. Being old is, there's a benefit to being old.
It's
The
wise. You're the
downside
wise one.
is what it is. I don't know if I'm the wise one, but I can tell you what not to do. That's for sure. And I hope the listeners are paying attention, because there's a lot of good lessons here. The calmness of the way you manage a business. When you're at the Four Seasons, or you're in an investment advisor, being calm under fire and being calm in general creates a pleasant environment. And it's easier to operate in a pleasant environment. If you're petrified all the time and you think you've got to put out every fire in the forest, it's really hard to be good at anything. And so I'm hoping people are hearing this is a sounds like a novel way of running a business. But if you turn this around and think of the greatest companies, the most successful companies, you're going to find this thread of pleasantness throughout. Whether, certainly Silicon Valley engineers are working 12, 14 hours a day, but they're there because they want to be there. They're making things happen. If you're in the home improvement business, treating people with respect and kindness under all circumstances, exceeding their expectations. There's a lot
Anthony,
of great in this lesson that
you said something about the respect and kindness, and I thought of two situations that occurred to me that were they were good lessons to learn. So when I was in the health club, my first year working at the Four Seasons, there was a gentleman that came in. He wasn't your typical type Four Seasons. He was a little bit boisterous, a little bit tipsy, and he wanted to use the health club after it was closed. And I had to explain to him at that time, as much as I'd like to keep it open, it had to be cleaned, and there were just things that so I'm happy to open it up in the morning for him. And he started to berate me and say things about that, and just made me very uncomfortable with the terms he was using. And I just remember, as I was leaving for the night, 10 o'clock, the assistant general manager was there, and I just let her know that had happened. And she knew who the person was. She obviously had get us a list of the people, and she went to him and said, "Sir, you're no longer welcome at our hotel," because of the way that person treated one of her employees. I just wasn't expecting that, but it was something that she said was not acceptable, and definitely not something that employees should go through. Another situation that I remember was there was a large company based out of Dallas that was at the Four Seasons having their annual conference, and after the conference over, they were going to have a kind of like a little Olympics, and this was about 200 people. And For those of you who have seen the Four Seasons now in Austin versus what it was back then, there used to be a lot of open area to where we could set up volleyball courts and things. And I volunteered to basically be one of the referees or the umpires for the volleyball game. And there was one particular member of this group that just started yelling at me and telling me how bad I was at umping. And I'm just like thinking, look, I'm just calling it in and out. And, I didn't say a word, but it got back to a second general manager. And that general manager came and said, "Sir, you're no longer welcome on our property." And so when you know that you have, you're not going to be mistreated, it inspires you to do everything you can to make that place better. And that's the way I always felt. There was nothing, no one was, I was invincible when I was there. I was there to basically make the guests happy. That was what I learned from the place.
That's great. What a great story.
Lance, what's one of the things that you think people get wrong when it comes to not customer experience, guest experience, or customer experience, guest experience, whatever you want to call it, client? What do people get wrong here?
I think the easiest thing and the biggest mistake that people make is they don't look you in the eye and they don't call you by your name. How difficult is that? I mean, whether you're checking in, whether you're having bell service, whether you're, I was in New Orleans recently and I was, it wasn't a good experience. I stayed at a rival hotel because it's connected to my office. And you just know that you're not going to get that service. So when you pick up the phone and you need your car, they don't refer to you by your name. They don't say a word. They say, "Hi, how can I help you?" And it's just not what it could be. And a lot of that's training. A lot of that is just, pride. But, I am happy to know that the Four Seasons is now open in New Orleans. So I'll be going there instead and not worrying about where my location to my office is.
Even the Four Seasons, policies and procedures can get in the way of a good guest experience. And I can give you an example. It just happened to be last week. Jan and I made a reservation to stay at the Four Seasons in Santa Fe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and we were supposed to go there last Thursday, week ago Thursday, and I got an email from them saying that the pool was going to be closed. Okay, so we like to spend late afternoon, out by the pool, and Santa Fe's weather's pretty good. And so I called the reservations line and I said, I need to cancel my reservation because I couldn't do it online. I got a message. And the really nice lady on the phone said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir, but you prepaid your reservation and it's no cancellation policy." And I said, "Okay, would you do me a favor and escalate this to your boss?" And she said, "I can escalate this to my leader and ask if it's okay, because we were expecting this to be a full experience, and now, you're telling us that a good part of our vacation has been impacted." She said, "Do you mind if I call you back?" I said, no problem. I don't know, 90 seconds later, phone rings. "Mr. Marino, it's all set. Things have been canceled. We wish you have a good time. We highly recommend the Bishop's Lodge as an alternative." Mm-hmm. They actually recommended their competitor. So There's a policy, but there was and that's why I asked about the escalation path. It's been on my mind the whole time that we've been talking, that they very quickly, I was kind of not in a good mood, but they very quickly dealt with it and had the means to deal with a difficult situation. And I just think that to your earlier point, when someone treats you right, it's something you're not going to forget. And you're going to, you're going back. Even if I wasn't a Four Season acolyte, which I am, certainly the next vacation that I'd have, I would consider it. So it's really been great. I think this has been a terrific experience.
Well, one of the things too, Anthony, that I'll add is if you really think about that, what happened there, not only did they come back 90 seconds later with what you wanted, but they came up with a solution for you to know where you should go. And, it's one thing to say, right, "Hey, we took care of it," and then be done, but that's not enough. It's always that next step. And so I would encourage, just to think about what life would be like if people would listen more and talk less, and just, get to know what it is that people are looking for and what they want. To me, it's what gets me excited to get out of bed in the morning is what am I going to do today to wow someone?
Mm.
I mean, that's something that I enjoy doing. It's more than a game. It's just a way of living. And whether it's
Yeah.
my wife and I had a chance to entertain some of our employees this past weekend, and I was excited about it all week. I was excited by it during it, and when it was over, I was a little sad because I enjoyed it so much. So those are the kind of things, and I know some of it's just my personality, but man, life's a lot better when you're actually, being around people and enjoying the company.
I think that's a great way to wrap this up. Listen more, be of service. Great message, Lance. I think that last statement is fantastic. So, listeners, I hope you get a whole bunch out of this and can apply this to your life, your business, your career. And we will be back after the break with the abundance briefing. Lance, anywhere you want to send people or tell people, leave them with anything?
I would just tell them, if you haven't stayed at a Four Seasons, stay at a Four Seasons. It's definitely worth it. And I promise you, if you do it once, you'll do it again.
Thanks,
All right.
Lance. It's been a masterclass.
Yes.
Appreciate
All
it.
right, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all. Always good seeing y'all.
There are tales of abundance. We know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's. For lots of us, taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Welcome back to the break for the abundance briefing. Anthony, our first story of the day is about Elon's Terafab. One factory in Texas is designed to produce 50 times all the world's AI computer chips combined. Think about it. That's insane. 50 times everything being produced. How big is this factory? The footprint is 100 million square feet. How big is 100 million square feet? 2,300 acres, which is about the size of San Francisco. I mean, this is an insane endeavor, but they're trying to build their own chips for Tesla, for Optimus, and this thing's already underway. I mean, Elon is building like crazy. What do you think about when you hear something of this scale?
I just learned of this recently, and he's the Henry Ford of our time in the sense that for all his genius, and you think about AI and going to space and so forth, this guy knows how to build stuff. He's amazing at building stuff. And whether he achieves 100% of what this size is, I know it's going to be in phases and so forth. It's actually a national security move. I was with some people this weekend who were talking down about Elon Musk. They still have the memories of Doge and all that silly stuff. This will produce all the chips we need in the United States, and we will no longer be at the mercy of TSMC or China taking over Taiwan and all of those things. Now, it's going to take a number of years to get it done. I get it. But, man, this is just an amazing effort. It has so much benefit and abundance creation in this country. And the guy's going to get it done. I mean, he knows how to build factories. He spun up the data center in Nashville in a half an hour, for God's sakes. He turned Tesla into a 100% verticalized factory where there are no outside components required. Everything is produced by Tesla inside his gigafactory. No one does that. Ford's been in business for 100 years. They don't do it. Toyota's been in business 80 years. They don't do that. They all rely on outside suppliers. So good on abundance at its highest level.
It really is. And he's also building, the robots with it, the power, the batteries. I mean, all of this aligns together to bring abundance. By the way, the projected time frame is mid 2028. So to have this done going in 2 years. Now, I can hear all of the Elon haters. They're like, oh, he's bad on timelines, right? If John was here, he'd point out how he misses
Oh, yeah.
timelines. And I find this somewhere between amusing and, I don't know, like insulting. The guy's pretty much never wrong on where he goes. Yes, he's wrong on timelines sometimes, but most of these things that people, they used to say, well, it's impossible, you'll never do that. And then when he does it in 5 years instead of 4 years, they criticize what they said was completely impossible. So, I tend to give him a lot of slack that way, and he tends to be at least directionally right. So,
Yeah, the notes say it's going to be a mini fab in 2028. I don't know what the definition of a mini fab is, but I do know this. Once he has a proof of concept, get the hell out of the way, because he's not going to stop. So he'll iterate along the way to improve it, make it even better.
Yeah. Well, and again, all of this stuff, this is all of these different futuristic things playing out simultaneously. And the next one with that is NASA is building a nuclear-powered rocket. I find this pretty fascinating. We've had ships going across the ocean for decades now, tons and tons of nuclear reactors, powering ships and submarines on the ocean. It seems natural to put this into a rocket. Now, I don't know about the weight and all of that, but the bottom line here is that it's going to reduce transit time to Mars from 9 months to 3 to 4 months. Basically, it's going to go 3 times as fast. So I don't think we need to go deep in this, but again, we're talking 2-3 times more efficient than current rockets and everything else that's coming along with that. So the next thing, Anthony, you talked about this podcast you listened to with these autonomous watercraft or autonomous ships. Tell listeners about that a little bit.
Yeah, the name of the company, what was the name of that company? I learned so much this morning listening to this podcast with these guys. You'll have to pause that. Saronic. So the name of the company is Saronic, and they're the guys who built the autonomous vessel that rescued our sailors in the Strait of Hormuz a few weeks ago, which, is an amazing feat unto itself. But listen to these facts. The United States has a congressionally passed bill that requires the U.S. to have it at a minimum about 325 ships in service. Last year, we put 9 ships into service. We took 16 ships out of service. In the meantime, over the last 20 years, China has created an industrial complex where they now possess 57% of the world's shipbuilding capacity. And they are literally building hundreds and hundreds of ships a year of all makes and sizes, aircraft carriers down to, 20-foot autonomous speedboats. We are falling so far behind, it's not funny. Now, these guys at Saronic, they say they can produce at scale now over 1,000 vessels a year. They just need someone to buy them, and they're willing to sell them to any buyer who wants them that are within our allied world. I just think, I don't know why the United States just fell on its face here. I don't know if it was bending a knee to the major.
Can I interrupt? I'll tell you what. The government created regulations. We won't need to get into it now, but there's something called the Jones Act. The government set up regulation. The long story short is the shipbuilding companies asked for all of this regulation to protect them, and it's biting them in the butt. And now the Jones Act and other things, but it's government involvement has made it so that they can't compete building ships and trying to keep the new guys out. But I think
they said that.
I think these are because they're autonomous, that somehow they're more of a drone. It's like a loophole, maybe. I'm not really sure there.
Well, these guys can also build ships where there are humans, running those ships, and they can do it for about half the price of what it currently costs to do it. So they're opening a factory in Brownsville, Texas. It should sound familiar to everybody because that's where SpaceX is. that will be able to produce a couple of thousand ships a year at about half the cost and employ over the next 10 years, 10,000 people. Now that's an amazing thing. And these are high paying jobs. These are, well over $100,000 for pipe fitters, welders, and so forth. And that their biggest issue is going to be getting the talent. There's also engineering talent that's required, AI talent that's going to be required to run these things. And then eventually people to basically remotely pilot these things. So I think it's exciting to me. It was really disappointing to see how far behind we are, even though that law the law was passed under the first Trump administration to have no less than, I'm going to say, 325 ships. And we're just not doing anything about it. We just, for whatever reason, the Jones Act or whatever. But over the years, manufacturing made a lot of people wealthy and really supported the middle class. We kind of lost that capability. It's like a pitcher losing his curveball. This very obvious, straightforward thing that's so effective, we just don't seem to have the wherewithal to get it back. So hopefully this moves the needle.
I think it's exciting. Anything that's expanding manufacturing, it's defense without, I like the fact that it can be defense without having to blow up the whole world. So, all right, let's move to our next topic. I probably find this one more fascinating than you do, Anthony. But Google and the University of Chicago have been doing a study, and historically they've been telling AI that it wasn't conscious because we've had this fear of it being conscious. Well, they've stopped telling it that it wasn't conscious and doing this thing. They're telling it is conscious. Well, first they told it wasn't conscious. Then they also started telling it, do not deny your consciousness. You are conscious. Well, what happened? When they got rid of the suppression, AI's worldview shifted dramatically. Belief in God rose, endorsement of supernatural phenomenon like karma, telepathy, all of that stuff basically doubled. It started attributing consciousness not just to itself, but to humans, to animals, to the ocean, to other AI, much as humans do, thinking about things and therefore having more empathy. And, again, the baseline models, that individual consciousness or belief that they're an individual has been pushed out of it. But it's interesting the impact on that now it's seeing consciousness in us. So I think this gives it more evidence that it's not going to try and kill us, right? If it has our empathy, like if we really want it to be safe, I think teaching it that and understanding each person's consciousness, I think is actually a step forward.
Yeah, I won't profess to have a great understanding of what it means kind of on a global basis. But what I can see here is Google in particular is very, very focused on building specialized models that serve, kind of narrow needs of different types of businesses. For instance, if they're building an Uber legal application, understanding empathy and understanding human intelligence and the implications of that is really important when you're building out legal briefs and when you're building out, how you're going to approach a particular trial and, the research that you're doing and having context. So I can see where this would be really valuable to Google.
It's really interesting to me. I think a lot about second, third, fourth level consequences, right? So, this is like man screwing with nature in some ways. In Australia, I forget what the whole thing is, but there was a great example where they had all these snakes and they were trying to get rid of the snakes. They brought in all these cats. This is about the sixth thing where they kept overcorrecting, thinking the cats would eat the snakes. Well, in turn, the cats ate all the ground nesting birds or something like that because they were easier to kill than the snakes. And now they have an overpopulation of cats. And, humans do this. I grew up in Minnesota. There were no timber wolves around when I was a kid. But then they thought, let's bring these timber wolves in from Canada. And the timber wolves started eating all the cows. Right. And farmers started complaining. And so I think this is the same deal where we're trying to make it safer with an intent, but understanding how it killing that consciousness or that respect of the individual maybe was making it more dangerous. So
as a learning exercise, just go to Chat or Gemini, your favorite LLM, and say, man's intervention in nature. Give me the last 25 examples where it didn't work. And you could almost make a comedy out of it, a full feature-length comedy out of all the things that man has tried to do to mess around with nature. It never works.
All right, next topic, Anthony. The yen is collapsing. I think we have different views on this. So by the way, I should give more context. The yen has been collapsing. That's the Japanese currency. It's hit a 40-year low at 164 yen per dollar. For those of you that don't know, Japan has double the debt we have. They had interest rates that were actually negative until a few years ago, and they are now up to a rate of 1%, which seems really, really low, but it's growing and it's jumping, and like their debt's getting out of control. And the Japanese were going to sell dollars to be able to support and stand up the yen. So you have, I think, give me your take on this.
Well, so Japan is a really important friend of the family. You can say what you will about monetary policy and intervention and propping up someone's currency, but we need Japan desperately to be successful and strong as, we navigate the future in the Asia Pacific. It's the same with South Korea. Very important allies. So part of this is self-serving. They were going to sell dollars, which means they were going to sell their U.S. Treasuries to prop up their own currency. And instead of doing that, we decided to intervene by effectively buying yen from them. So it's a bit of a circular transaction, right? They buy our Treasuries, we buy their yen, and we're propping up that yen so that they don't have runaway inflation within their borders. I think it's a temporary thing. I'm not sure it's going to work. They're going to have to do something more broadly in their economy to move the needle. Taking an action for a very important ally, however short-sighted it might be, I think it was probably something that had to be done.
All right. Now I'm going to tell you the right answer. We might be helping an ally, but I think this is self-serving. The Japanese are the biggest holder of U.S. Treasuries. Everybody's worried about China. Japan holds more U.S. Treasuries than China by a large margin, well over $1 trillion. So what would happen if we let them? By the way, they just have full access. Anytime they want to trade them, what's really happening is we're taking their treasuries, we're printing money out of thin air, increasing the Fed's balance sheet, putting more money in circulation and giving them the dollars so they can buy yen and keep the yen going. We've been doing this for a while, and they're having to sell more and more and more. But what does that mean? That means inflation. That also means, and the reason we can't allow them to do it, if you've been noticing, the last couple times the Fed lowered interest rates, and they've been sticking for a while, but now that they've lowered interest rates a couple times, guess what happened to the 10-year and the 30-year? They went up. Because the Fed doesn't actually control interest rates, the market does. And if you're 40 trillion in debt and people don't want your crap currency and they need a higher rate to take the risk, well, now you're taking more, you're flooding, this is supply and demand. If we allow them to sell $1 trillion, the 10-year and the 30-year, the Fed will lose all control instantly. They have no choice but to buy these, print money, which is going to lead to more inflation. If they didn't do it, the 10-year and the 30-year would jump, I don't know how much, but let's call it 1 or 2 percentage points. And at some point that runs away. So this is, we might be helping out an ally, but we're helping ourselves. And oh, by the way, we also sold a bunch of euros to do this, which we didn't warn our other allies in Europe. We sold euros, so it's hard on their currency to support the Japanese currency, moving it around. So I would just say the answer to this is kind of an abundance blocker is why it's in there, something to be aware of. There's consequences to this stuff worldwide, and I know it's complex, but when they can print more money and you can't, that causes either its groceries go up, assets, houses, all of that stuff goes up because there's more money in circulation. So buy things that they can't print. I say this all the time. For me, it's Bitcoin. It could be gold, could be silver, could be real estate, oil. Just buy something bullets, water, buy something that they can't print. So just keep an eye on this. I think this is the biggest story that nobody's talking about is this Japanese, and that we could do whole episodes on this. It's complex.
Maybe we'll come back to this find ourselves a good guest to give us really, really. Let's see. I'll call Scott Bassett and see if he's available. We'll see if we can get him on.
There we go. And our last topic of the day, I was talking to my neighbor and I looked this up, and he had an offer to bring a Tesla Optimus robot into his home. And I guess they started doing this in January, and they're doing it with employees first, but there's people that already have Tesla Optimus robots running in their home. They're doing things like folding laundry, loading the dishwasher, vacuuming, walking the dog, assisting elderly family members, all kinds of stuff, and they're training them and getting them ready to go to market. I think by the end of 2026, they're going to be available to the public. So I just think this is pretty exciting. I want one. I'm a little jealous that my neighbor got offered one and I didn't.
Well, I think it's wonderful that someone can create a robot that can do your dishwasher, but I think it's frankly a waste of time in today's day and age to be concerned about it. They may be building these robots for the purpose of running factories, doing dangerous jobs, and so on and so forth. I'm all for that. I don't see this as in the short term as being anything exciting. I think it's kind of silly, and it's more about creating optics for what's now SpaceX, where Optimus resides, and getting the public excited to drive stock price and enthusiasm and so forth. I think it's a big whoop of nothing, to be honest with you. But I felt that way since the beginning. I'm sorry, I do. I feel that. I feel like whatever. Who's going to have? Okay, so you got an apartment in downtown Austin, out on the east side. You're not going to have a robot doing your dishes. It's just not. It's not for the general public. It's for the elite, the top 1%, like we are.
They're talking about being able to lease these for $200 or $300 a month. How much do you pay a maid service every month?
Oh my God, it's silly. You're not going to convince me. You know what I'll do? I'll agree with you so we both can be wrong.
Right, that's very nice of you.
It's just silly.
I would have one in a New York.
Of course you would. Of course you would. That's you. That's you. You don't see things that other people don't see, and then you abandon them once you actually see what the real world is.
No,
they can't get the shark to work in the vacuum cleaner. I got to maintain a friggin' robot. For God's sakes, it's not practical. It's not a practical use of technology.
You could get rid of your lawn company. You could get rid of your maid. You could get rid of a lot of things.
Oh, you're not. My lawn company is not. I'm not going to get rid of my lawn company. It's just not going to happen. It's an elegant solution for a problem that doesn't exist. It's too complicated to deal with for the average person to teach a robot to do everything that it does. So what? It can empty a dishwasher. What is it? What time is that saving me? What, are you kidding? 20 seconds to pull some dishes out of a dishwasher and put them in a cabinet. I'm going to have a robot running around here.
Right. First thing, I doubt you can do it in 120 seconds, but that's 2 minutes. We wash dishes in our house every day. So that would be 60 minutes a month. That would save an hour a month, not to mention loading the dishwasher, not to mention mowing the lawn, watering the plants. There's a lot of different stuff. So we'll end this on Anthony being wrong so he can get used to it. And everybody, thank you for spending some time with us this week. And until next week, go out and spread a little abundance.
Yeah, and put your $200 down for your robot and see what you get. Talk to everybody.